How's it going, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Underrated Series. I'm Steve Cravens, and today I'm going to be talking about James Mangold's The Wolverine, which came out in the summer of 2013. This is a criminally underrated superhero movie. I understand that people were pretty soured from X-Men Origins that came out 4 years prior, and there's a lot of people that think it doesn't hold a candle to Logan, which came 4 years after. In my opinion, it does a lot more things right than it does wrong. It's got some pretty memorable action sequences. It's got a great performance by Hugh Jackman, and James Mangold directs the hell out of it. So a little backstory first, before we get into the actual movie. Darren Aronofsky was actually slated to direct this thing back in December of 2010. This was when Black Swan first came out. And he was in pre-production on it for a while. It's going to be very hardcore, very, brutal, essentially what Logan ended up being. And a couple months into pre-production, or maybe even a month, maybe it wasn't even a couple months, he decided that he was not going to direct it because he didn't want to be away from his family for the amount of time it was going to take to film the movie down in Australia. A part of me is devastated that he didn't direct it, because I would have loved to have seen what he would have done with the material, especially with the script. But then again, a couple months after the fact, he had no problem going to Iceland to film Noah. And we all saw what he did with that. So, I don't know, maybe it's for the best they didn't direct it. But anyway, after that, 20th Century Fox and Hugh Jackman put together a short list of directors to replace him. And included Jose Padilla, Antoine Fuqua, Doug Liman, Mark Romanek, Justin Lin, Gavin O'Connor, and eventually they went for James Mangold because he had a pretty great relationship with Hugh Jackman working on Kate and Leopold back in 2001. Needless to say, those of us who love the Wolverine, and certainly those of us who love Logan, are very, very grateful that they went with James Mangold. He did an excellent job here. And he's a very talented filmmaker in his own right. He's got a very diverse resume filled with some wonderful movies. Copland, Girl Interrupted, Kate and Leopold, like I said, Identity, Walk the Line, the remake of 3:10 to Yuma, which is very underseen but wonderful movie. Night and Day was his only misstep in 2010. That was kind of a dud. And then he did The Wolverine in 2013. Followed that up with Logan in 2017. And Ford vs. Ferrari, which came out last November. Wonderful movie if you haven't had the chance to see it yet. Incredible movie. But this is about the Wolverine. And again, I think he directed the hell out of it. It's incredibly stylish, incredibly atmospheric. And the script is actually pretty solid. There's a couple lines that don't really work. Some of the deliveries are a little bit corny. And there are a couple holes here and there. Not too big, but just, they are there. So it's not a perfect movie by any means. I get that. But it's certainly a hell of a lot better than, people give it credit for. So, for example, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 71% fresh rating by critics. And then with audiences, it has a 69% approval rating, which is, it's solid. It's still fresh. A majority of the people like it. That's fine. Then you get to IMDb. And on IMDb, it has a 6.7 rating. Now, IMDb ratings are not the best barometer for, quality or, the true excellence of a movie per se. It's more of a popularity contest more than anything. But based on those popularity contests, if that's what we're calling these ratings, X-Men The Last Stand is just as popular as The Wolverine with a 6.7 rating as well, which is, that's unacceptable. The Wolverine is a much better movie than The Last Stand. There's a lot of movies that are a lot better than The Last Stand. The Wolverine being one of them. I mean, this movie deserves so much more respect than that. The artistry on display compared to the shit fest that Brett Ratner put together. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But anyway, I'm going to tell you why I think this movie deserves a lot better. And one, because you can clearly see that there was a lot of effort and creativity put into this movie. As much as it is a piece of commercial entertainment, it is also a work of art. And I think some of the pros about it: brilliantly shot action sequences, well choreographed. You can see every punch land, every stabbing motion, every gunshot. The sound effects are incredible for the stabbing, the gunshots, everything. The bullet train sequence is incredible. One of the most unique fight scenes I've ever seen in any superhero movie. It's a great combination of practical set and CGI green screen. And then there's the great cinematography. I mean, this movie is crisp. It is sharp. I mean, it's colorful. And I'm kind of looking at the first Avengers, which looks like it was made very much for TV. But this film is absolutely gorgeous to look at. And they make, Hugh Jackman's body, I mean, as ripped as it is, I mean, it really looks absolutely fierce when you see it the way they light it. You can see every, vein in his arm, in his chest, I mean, in his neck. I mean, this guy's just completely shredded. And the locations are beautiful in Japan. Now, most of it was filmed in 20th Century Fox Studios down in Sydney and in other locations around Sydney and in Australia, but they did do some location shooting in Japan. And those locations are absolutely gorgeous. I've wanted to go to Japan my whole life. I have a fascination with Japanese culture, so that's maybe why I'm more, prone to, defend this movie more than others. But, I mean, you're talking about the beautiful Japanese gardens that they film in with the bonsai trees and the ponds with the koi fish and the bridges and the mansions just outside Tokyo overlooking the skyscrapers, the skyline. And then they have the beautiful rain sequences, and they have the fishing villages outside Nagasaki. Beautiful, beautiful location. Small Japanese villages, in a light snowfall. I mean, the movie just looks sensational. I mean, the production value is just off the charts. And it does have a hell of a cast. Absolutely hell of a cast. And like I said, some of the dialogue's a little clunky. Some of it doesn't really work in terms of being convincing. But I think the cast does the best they can with what they have. And Hugh Jackman has, outside of Logan, he's never been better in this role. I mean, the physical dedication that he put into making himself look the best that he possibly could. Even contacting The Rock for, tips on how to, get as much muscle mass as he could while, shedding as much body fat. As a matter of fact, he used this technique of not drinking water. I believe it was several hours before they would start filming, so that way his body would be dehydrated, and then like the muscles would come out more and the veins would come out more. And he said it gave him killer headaches, but ultimately it was worth it, I think, because when you see him up there on the screen, he looks incredible. I mean, he just looks like a fucking fierce animal up there. The supporting cast, the Japanese actors are all fantastic, especially Hiroyuki Sanada. Plays one of the villains. He's a wonderful actor. He actually, and most recently, you would have seen him, he had a cameo as the Yakuza boss in Avengers Endgame. Wonderful Japanese actor. And they all do a wonderful job. The villains are fantastic. And now, I'm not going to get too deep into the plot for those of you who have not seen the movie, because I'd prefer for you to see it before you watch this. And it's a pretty standard plot. He goes to see a man who he has known from World War II, specifically outside of the nuclear bomb going off just outside Nagasaki when he was in a Japanese POW camp. And he goes to see the man that he saved, a Japanese man who's one of the guards, to basically say bon voyage to him, or so he thinks, because he's about this close to being dead. Turns out that this man, Mr. Yoshida is his name, wants to know Logan's secret to immortality. Of course, Logan is reluctant to give it to him. As a matter of fact, in the movie, he tells him, "You don't want what I have." And then, of course, he has the love interest, played by Tao Okamoto, and she plays the character of Mariko. This character, while underwritten a tad, in my opinion, is critical to this character of Logan, Wolverine. Obviously, he is emotionally distraught and devastated by the death of Jean Grey from The Last Stand. And he even has nightmares about her, about killing her again, and about her not being able to stay with him. So obviously her death weighs a lot on his conscience. And Mariko's presence slowly but surely kind of lifts him out of that abyss that he's been in ever since Jean has died. And I think that both Tao and Hugh have wonderful chemistry together. As slow build up as it is for both of them kind of falling for each other, it's very authentic. It's not forced by any means, and it's one of the highlights of the movie, in my opinion, because that's when Hugh does his best acting, is when we start to see the tenderness of him start to come out. That he was able to find someone other than Jean to bring out the human side of him, and to kind of table the monster that he is. So I absolutely love that, and you don't get that in other X-Men movies. An adult woman who's able to kind of lift him out of that depression, lift him out of that terrible abyss of sadness and depression that he's in because of her death. And it's great to see the character have, at least for a moment, a small measure of peace because of this woman's affection. In addition to the wonderful set pieces and the locations in the movie, we're treated to Logan in a way that we've never really seen him before, in the sense that he's a complete outsider to this world, despite being in Japan back in World War II. He's an outsider to modern Japan. He's a gaijin, as they call him. Now, Wolverine's used to being an outsider. He's used to being a loner. He's used to being, living out in the woods, for example, as he is in the beginning of this film. He's, a hermit living out in the woods in the Yukon. So he's used to that. But again, he's kind of used to that on his terms. He's used to that being at home, as it were. But seeing him dropped in the middle of a foreign land like Japan, where everything seems to be moving at, a bullet's pace, and he doesn't speak the language, and he doesn't understand the customs of the culture. So that was very interesting to see him in a world where he, was out of his depth. Now, in addition to everything that I've made mention here, I'm going to go ahead and say that as much as I love Logan, and I do love that movie, I think Logan is a wonderful, wonderful movie. It's tough to watch at times. It's emotionally draining, and the brutality of the movie is incredibly unflinching and vicious. But I would actually go ahead and say that I would rather watch The Wolverine over Logan. That's not to say that I think The Wolverine is a better movie than Logan. I just think it's a much easier watch. And even with the PG-13 rating, the violence is still pretty hard-hitting. I mean, the sound effects make every single punch and bullet hole, really resonate. Every, stab sound resonate. There's a little bit of blood, not much because of the rating, but there is enough blood where, you can feel everything. And there's also that great sequence, not to get too much off my point I was going to make, but there's that great sequence where, throughout the movie, he's taking bullet shots, and he's taking like punches and stabbings, and he's not healing as fast as he's used to. He's like, "What the hell is going on?" He finds out that he has a parasite in his heart that's preventing him from regenerating as quickly as he's used to. And there's a scene like that in here where he has to, cut his, stomach open, and he kind of reaches inside and pulls this mechanical spider, if you will, off his heart so he can have his regenerative properties back. It's a great scene, and it really kind of pushed the boundaries of PG-13 because it was pretty intense. But I would rather watch the movie simply because it's more enjoyable to watch, and the locations are just that beautiful to see, especially if you have an affinity for Japanese culture. I mean, to see downtown Tokyo, or at least sets that look like downtown Tokyo, which I'm sure they filmed in Sydney, to see the beautiful temples and the Japanese gardens, and to see the fishing villages and the snowy villages and the beautiful rain sequences that make everything that much more atmospheric and intimate. It's just, and to see his character go through this arc again, where at the very end, when he's traveling with Yukio, who's like his sidekick throughout the movie, and they're debating about where to travel at the very end of the movie. To see him with a little bit of optimism in his face, a lot happier than when we saw him at the beginning of the film when he was living out in the Yukon. That makes it worthwhile watching, I think, for a character as tortured as Logan is. Now, it doesn't have the endless CGI battles that we're used to seeing thanks to the Avengers movies and Man of Steel and all the MCU movies, Batman vs Superman, Aquaman. It doesn't have these green screen CGI fests that we're used to, and it's a much more character-driven movie. So I can get why a lot of people, it's not their favorite to watch. They'd rather watch something else with a lot more spectacle. It's a little bit slower than other movies. A little bit more violent than other movies that we're used to seeing. So I can see why some people wouldn't put this higher than they do. And I know a lot of people have problems with that third act and how it kind of betrays the other two acts that come before it in terms of tone. I'll be the first to admit that when I first saw Wolverine when it first came out, the third act did kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit, and it took away some points for me for the rest of the movie. And then for some reason, when I saw it the second time about a year later, The third act didn't bother me anymore. It's still not perfect, but it wasn't as out of place as the first time I saw the film. And it's got again, some more great action sequences, a little bit more heavy on the CGI side, which is why it kind of betrays the rest of it that comes before. Because even though there's CGI in the rest of the movie, it's nowhere near as noticeable, and it's a lot more practical effects in the beginning of the movie. So I hear the flaws about it in terms of the third act, and yes, it doesn't provide the spectacle that we're used to seeing from modern day blockbusters. But again, the spectacle we do have, the locations we have, the fight sequences, the character development, the gorgeous cinematography, even Marco Beltrami's score is pretty solid, if not inspiring. The movie is definitely worth your time. It's a worthy addition to the series. Like I said, I'm hoping that over time, maybe tastes change and people go back and give it another shot. Maybe the third act won't bother them as much, for the CGI that it does have, and it does feel kind of rushed in places. So again, I'm not saying that it's a perfect movie. I'm simply saying that it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for. Certainly in this day and age where the market is completely oversaturated with below average superhero fare. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. I love it. I love rewatching it every year. And like I said, it's like a fine wine. It just gets better with age. And I'm hopeful that that if you are watching this and you have seen it before, and you're kind of like, well, that third act did bother me, or oh well, it was a little too slow for me, or this plot point bothered me, or that if you're one of those people that enjoyed it but weren't totally in love with it, I urge you to give it another go, because I do think you'll appreciate it a little bit more on the second go around than you did in the first round. Because that's what happened to me. That's what happened to a couple people that I know. My wife was one of them. My wife said that she didn't like the movie at all the first time she saw it, and then we watched it together a couple of years ago, and she said, I don't know what happened, but I liked it a lot better. And she said, it's the same movie, obviously. It just the second go around, maybe just knowing what it is, you're able to appreciate it more. So, excellent job by Hugh Jackman. Excellent job by James Mangold. Definitely worth your time. If you want to see, what the inspiration was for it, check out the Wolverine comic by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller, where he's in Japan. And that's really what made Hugh Jackman want to do this movie in Japan in the first place. But anyways, hope you give it another go, and I hope you enjoy it. And this has been the Underrated series, and thank you for watching.